Zareth stood on the lush, emerald fields of Veridonia, the gentle breeze brushing against her skin as she gazed at the horizon. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the landscape, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within her heart. Today was monumental. Today, she would embark on a mission to Earth, a planet whose reputation among her people was rife with suspicion and hostility. The Council of Elders had emphasized the importance of peace, but as she recalled the tales of human greed and unpredictability, a knot of doubt twisted in her stomach. Zareth, a voice called, interrupting her thoughts. It was Elder the Los, his silver hair flowing like the gentle streams of their home world. He approached with purpose, his expression a mixture of pride and concern. "Are you ready for your mission?" Zareth turned to face him, her emerald eyes reflecting the light of the setting sun. "I understand the importance, Elder, but—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Can we truly trust them? The humans have a history of violence and betrayal." The Los placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We must give them a chance, my dear. The fate of both our worlds depends on it. Remember, you are not just representing Veridonia. You are a beacon of hope for peace." His voice softened. "You have always longed for connection. Perhaps this mission will lead you to it." She nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle in her heart. Connection had been a distant dream for Zareth, one she had longed for since childhood. Growing up in the shadow of her parents' expectations, she had often felt isolated, her dreams overshadowed by duty. The Council's call for peace was an opportunity, but it also stirred a fear of what might come if she failed. As the last rays of the sun faded, Zareth took a deep breath, steeling herself for the journey ahead. The transport ship awaited her, its sleek design a testament to Veridonia's advanced technology. She climbed aboard, her heart racing with anticipation and apprehension. As the engines roared to life, she glanced back at her home, the fields of Veridonia shrinking into the distance, a bittersweet farewell. Meanwhile, on Earth, Kael paced restlessly in the dimly lit underground hideout of the rebel base. The air was thick with tension, the walls adorned with posters of fallen comrades and slogans demanding change. His heart pounded in his chest as he prepared for the next operation against the oppressive regime that had plagued humanity for far too long. They were mounting a raid against a supply depot, a small victory in a fight that felt endless. "Kael, are you ready?" Mira, his second-in-command, asked, her voice cutting through his thoughts. She was a fierce fighter, her loyalty unwavering, but even she could sense his distraction. He nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just thinking about the mission. If we can hit them hard today, it might just send a message." But deep down, frustration gnawed at him. They had been fighting for scraps, and the lack of support from outside, from other planets, even felt like a betrayal. Humanity was on its own, and the thought of reaching out for help felt futile. As they moved out, the streets of the city were cloaked in darkness, the oppressive regime's presence looming like a specter. Kael led the group, his heart thrumming with adrenaline. They navigated through the shadows, their footsteps silent as they approached the depot. The plan was simple. Get in, grab the supplies, and get out without drawing attention. But as they reached the perimeter, Kael felt a familiar weight settling on his shoulders, the weight of responsibility for his people. "Remember, stay sharp," he instructed, his voice low but firm. "We can't afford any mistakes." He glanced at his team, their faces resolute but weary, reflecting the toll that years of struggle had taken on them. They were fighters, but they were also human, and hope was a precious commodity that was running thin. As they executed the raid, the adrenaline surged through Kael's veins, and for a moment, the world narrowed down to the mission at hand. They moved swiftly, disabling security systems and gathering supplies. However, as they began their escape, a sudden alarm blared, shattering the silence. "Go! Go! Go!" Kael shouted, pushing his team forward. They sprinted through the darkened streets, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. Heart pounding, he led the way, his mind racing with thoughts of what their next steps would be. They had achieved their goal, but at what cost? The regime would retaliate, and the cycle of violence would continue. Once they reached the safety of their hideout, the team collapsed in exhaustion. Kael leaned against the wall, catching his breath. "At least we got some supplies," he said, trying to inject optimism into the air. But the cheers that usually followed such victories were muted, overshadowed by the reality of their ongoing struggles. "Kael, we need more than supplies," Mira said, her voice laced with frustration. "We need a real plan. We can't keep doing this alone." "What about the rumors of alien diplomats? They might be our chance." Kael's heart sank at the mention of the Veridonians. He had heard whispers of their involvement, but he remained skeptical. "You think they'd help us? They're diplomats, not warriors. And what do you think they'd want in return?" He shook his head, dismissing the idea. "We can't trust them." "Maybe it's time to change that," Mira countered, her eyes fierce. "If we can prove ourselves, if we can show them our fight, maybe they'll see that we're worth helping." Kael ran a hand through his hair, frustration boiling inside him. "And what if they don't? What if they turn on us? We've seen what happens when we let our guard down. We can't afford to be naive." As the night wore on, Kael's mind churned with conflicting thoughts. He wanted to believe that there was hope, that the struggle for freedom could lead to something greater. But as he lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were fighting an uphill battle, one that might never end. Back on Veridonia, Zareth arrived on Earth, stepping off the transport ship with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The air was thick with energy, and the atmosphere buzzed with a chaotic blend of curiosity and suspicion. Media cameras flashed as reporters clamored for a glimpse of the alien diplomat. Zareth adjusted her stance, her heart racing. This was the moment she had trained for, the moment when she would represent her people on a foreign planet. As she made her way through the crowd, she could feel the weight of their gazes on her, a mixture of awe and skepticism. She had prepared for this moment, but the reality was overwhelming. "Keep calm," she whispered to herself, focusing on the goal ahead. The council had entrusted her with this mission, and she would not let them down. The negotiation chamber loomed ahead, a stark, sterile environment that contrasted with the vibrant chaos outside. Zareth took a deep breath, reminding herself of her purpose. She was here to prove that Veridonia sought peace, not war. As she stepped into the chamber, the tension was palpable. Representatives from Earth sat around a large table, their expressions a mix of curiosity and hostility. "Welcome, Ambassador Zareth," the head representative said, his voice steady but strained. "We hope your intentions are clear." Zareth met his gaze, her resolve hardening. "I am here to negotiate peace, to foster understanding between our worlds. We believe in the potential of cooperation, not conflict." Her voice was steady, but inside, she felt the weight of countless expectations pressing down on her. As the discussions began, she could sense the underlying tensions, the unspoken fears that lingered in the room. The humans were wary, and rightfully so. But as she spoke, Zareth realized that her own doubts about humanity were beginning to fade. Perhaps there was a chance for connection, for understanding. But would they see it? Would they be willing to take the leap of faith necessary for peace? With each passing moment, Zareth found herself engulfed in a whirlwind of emotions. The mission had begun, and she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Not just for her people, but for the possibility of a brighter future for both worlds. The negotiation chamber was a vast, sterile space filled with sleek, metallic surfaces that echoed the tension hanging thick in the air. Zareth stood at one end, her posture regal yet unyielding, a stark contrast to the human representatives who shuffled nervously in their seats. She had come to Earth with hopes of forging peace, but the atmosphere crackled with hostility, particularly from the figure who had just burst into the room. Kael strode in, a storm of defiance and passion. His dark hair fell rebelliously over his forehead, and his eyes, sharp and blazing, swept over the assembled diplomats. "This is an abomination," he declared, his voice booming, cutting through the sterile air like a knife. The representatives turned, startled, their expressions a mix of disbelief and irritation. Zareth's gaze locked onto him, her heart racing. She had heard of Kael, the rebel leader who had become a symbol of resistance against the oppressive regime that ruled Earth. She had prepared herself for many things during this negotiation, but not for the raw intensity he exuded. "Who let this insurgent in?" one of the human diplomats hissed, his face flushed with indignation. Kael ignored the question, his focus solely on Zareth. "You think you can come here, with your smooth words and grand promises, and convince us that your people mean us no harm? You're playing with fire. Alien." His tone was laced with contempt, and the sparks of animosity between them ignited the room. Zareth took a breath, steadying herself. "I am here to negotiate, not to fight," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "Veridonia seeks peace, not conflict. Your people have suffered, and I wish to help." "Help?" Kael scoffed, taking a step closer, his presence magnetic and formidable. "Your kind has always been the problem. You come here pretending to be saviors while we bleed in the streets. You think a few flowery speeches will erase the blood on your hands." His accusation stung. Zareth felt the weight of his words, the truth woven within his anger. But she also felt a flicker of challenge. "You cannot judge an entire people by the actions of a few. I am not responsible for the sins of my ancestors," she countered, her emerald eyes narrowing. "And neither are you." The tension between them was palpable, a clash of ideals and emotions. The other diplomats shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene or let the two powerful figures battle it out. Zareth could see the fire in Kael's gaze. It was both infuriating and exhilarating. She was torn between defending her people and acknowledging the pain evident in his eyes. "You speak of peace, yet you come with an army of your own," Kael challenged, his voice low and intense. "How can we trust you? How can we trust anyone from Veridonia?" "By understanding that I am here as a diplomat, not a warrior," she insisted, her voice rising slightly. "I want to create a bridge between our worlds, not a chasm." Kael's expression softened for just a moment, revealing a glimpse of vulnerability behind his fierce exterior. "And what if that bridge collapses? What if your people betray us again? We have lost too much already." His tone lowered, becoming almost pleading. Zareth could sense the pain that lay beneath his bravado, the weight of his struggles pressing down on him. She realized that behind the bravado of the rebel leader stood a man fighting for his people, for a future he believed in. "I understand your fear, Kael," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "But not all hope is lost. Together, we can forge a new path." Before Kael could respond, the meeting reached a boiling point, the diplomats erupting into a cacophony of voices, each trying to assert their position. Zareth felt overwhelmed, the noise drowning out her thoughts. She needed to escape, to breathe. "Enough!" she suddenly shouted, silencing the room. "I will not be a pawn in this game. I came here for peace, and I demand the respect to pursue it." Her words hung in the air, a challenge to both the humans and herself. With that, Zareth turned on her heel and exited the chamber, her heart racing. She found herself wandering into a nearby park, seeking solace in the greenery that surrounded her. The press of the city fell away, and for a moment, she felt the weight of her responsibilities lift. But moments later, she sensed a presence behind her. Kael had followed her, his footsteps firm and determined. "You can't just walk away," he said, a mix of frustration and concern in his voice. "We need to talk." Zareth turned to face him, her heart pounding. "What more is there to say?" "You made your feelings clear back there," she replied, crossing her arms defensively. Kael stepped closer, his expression serious. "I didn't mean to undermine your efforts. He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "I just don't trust you or your kind. My people have suffered too much to accept your words at face value." "You think I don't understand that?" Zareth shot back, her voice rising again. "I am risking everything to be here. My own people don't want me to negotiate with you. They think I'm betraying our heritage." Kael's gaze softened, and for a moment, the anger between them flickered like a candle in the wind. Then why are you here? Why are you willing to stand against your own? Because I believe in a better future, she replied, her voice steadying. I believe that we can find a way to coexist, to learn from each other. But it requires trust, and right now, I can't feel it from you. Silence fell between them, the tension shifting into something more complex. Kael stared at her, his expression torn between skepticism and intrigue. You're different from what I expected, he finally admitted, his voice low. I thought you'd be like the rest of them, cold, distant. But you're human in your own way. Zareth felt a warmth bloom in her chest at his words, an unbidden connection sparking between them. And you're not just a rebel, she said softly. You're a fighter for your people, and that takes courage. He looked away for a moment, the vulnerability returning to his eyes. I'm just trying to do what I can with the little I have left. But the weight of my people's suffering is heavy. I know what it's like to carry the burdens of my people, she replied, her voice gentle. I may be an alien to you, but I too seek a place where I can belong, where we can belong. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the park, the tension shifted again, morphing into something deeper. They stood there, two souls from opposite worlds, grappling with their emotions and the undeniable chemistry that crackled between them. Kael took a step closer, the distance between them narrowing. Maybe we can start with a small step, he suggested hesitantly. Together? Zareth asked, her heart racing. Together, he confirmed, a tentative smile breaking through his earlier hostility. But as they stood there, suspended in the moment, Zareth felt the heavy weight of her duty pressing down on her. Torn between her loyalty to Veridonia and the growing connection she felt for Kael, she knew that their worlds were on a collision course that could either lead to peace or destruction. Kael stood in the dimly lit room, the weight of his discovery pressing heavily on his shoulders. The flickering fluorescent light above cast an eerie glow, illuminating the grim determination etched across his face. He had received word of a plot within the oppressive regime, a scheme that, if successful, would not only sabotage the fragile negotiations with the Veridonians, but could also endanger countless lives. He knew he had to act swiftly, and his instincts screamed that Zareth was the only one he could trust with this information. His heart raced as he navigated the darkened corridors towards the small park where he had last seen her. The park was a sanctuary amidst the chaos, a place where he and Zareth had shared heated arguments that revealed their vulnerabilities. It was a place where they had begun to peel back the layers of mistrust that had initially defined their relationship. As he approached, he could see her silhouette framed by the soft glow of a nearby street lamp, her long, shimmering hair cascading around her shoulders like a waterfall of stars. Zareth, he called, urgency lacing his voice. She turned, her emerald eyes narrowing slightly at the sight of him. Kael, what are you doing here? I thought you were busy with your rebellious antics. This is serious, he replied, stepping closer. I've learned about a plot from within the regime. They're planning to undermine the negotiations, and I think it's worse than we imagined. Zareth's expression shifted from skepticism to concern. What do you mean? What exactly have you found out? Kael ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. I overheard a conversation between some high-ranking officials. They're going to create a situation that will paint the Veridonians as the aggressors. They want to incite violence and chaos to ruin any chance of peace. She crossed her arms, her brow furrowing as she processed his words. And you believe this is credible? Or is this just another one of your rebel theories? I know how it sounds, he said, his voice softening. But I wouldn't come to you if I didn't believe it. I need your help to investigate this. You're the only one who can get close enough to find out what they're planning. Zareth hesitated, the conflict within her evident. She had been trained to uphold her people's interests, but a small voice inside her urged her to consider Kael's plea. His passion and bravery were infectious, and despite their turbulent history, she found herself wanting to believe in something greater than politics. Why should I trust you? She asked, her tone challenging yet curious. Because I've seen the reality of life on Earth, Kael replied earnestly. I've watched my people suffer under this regime. I know the stakes are high, and I know you care about your people as much as I care about mine. We can't let this happen." Zareth sighed, her mind racing. She had come to Earth with the intention of securing peace, but now she found herself in a web of conspiracy that transcended her mission. "All right," she said finally, a flicker of resolve igniting in her chest. "I'll help you, but we need to be cautious. If the regime suspects we're onto them, they'll do anything to silence us." Kael nodded, relief flooding through him. "I knew you would understand. We'll have to meet in secret and gather information before making any moves." As they discussed their plan, Zareth felt a strange sense of camaraderie with Kael. Despite their differences, they were united by a common goal, and the tension that had once defined their relationship began to shift into something deeper. She found herself drawn to his unwavering determination, his fierce loyalty to his cause. It was intoxicating, and yet she felt a pang of fear at the potential consequences. The next few days unfolded in a whirlwind of covert meetings and whispered conversations. Zareth donned her diplomat's facade during the day, while secretly working with Kael at night to uncover the regime's plans. They explored the shadows of the city, moving through dimly lit alleys and abandoned warehouses, always wary of prying eyes. With each passing moment, their bond solidified, transcending the boundaries of their respective worlds. One evening, as they huddled in an abandoned building, Kael pulled out a small device he had managed to acquire from a sympathetic insider. "This should allow us to intercept communications from the regime," he explained, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "If we can gather enough evidence, we might be able to expose their plans before it's too late." Zareth leaned closer, her curiosity piqued. "How does it work?" Kael demonstrated, his fingers deftly navigating the device's interface. "We just need to tune in and listen for any mention of the negotiations or any suspicious activities. If we can catch them in the act, it could turn the tide in our favor." Zareth watched him work, captivated by his focus and intensity. It was a side of him she hadn't fully appreciated before, a blend of intellect and bravery that made her heart race. "You're quite resourceful," she said, a teasing smile creeping onto her lips. He looked up, a grin breaking through his seriousness. "Just doing what needs to be done. Besides, I can't let you have all the glory." As they worked late into the night, the air around them crackled with unspoken tension. Each glance lingered a moment too long, every brush of their hands igniting sparks that neither of them could ignore. Zareth felt the walls she had built around her heart begin to crumble, and for the first time, she entertained the idea of what it might mean to let someone in. But as they delved deeper into their investigation, the stakes grew higher. Zareth's resolve was tested when she received an encrypted transmission late one night, a message that sent chills down her spine. It warned her of a betrayal within her own ranks, a traitor poised to undermine everything she had worked for. "What is it?" Kael asked, noticing the sudden pallor of her face. "I just received a transmission," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a warning. Someone within my team is planning to betray us." Kael's expression hardened. "Do you know who it is?" "I don't know yet," she replied, her mind racing. "But I need to find out before it's too late. If the regime has inside information, we're all in danger." Kael took a step closer, his presence a comforting anchor amidst the turmoil. "We'll figure this out together. I won't let anyone hurt you, Zareth." She looked up at him, the intensity of his gaze holding her captive. In that moment, the reality of their situation crashed down around her. They were not just fighting for their worlds. They were fighting for each other. As fear and uncertainty swirled within her, Zareth felt a flicker of hope. Together, they were stronger, and together, they would navigate the treacherous waters ahead. But as the shadows loomed larger, Zareth couldn't shake the feeling that their burgeoning connection was as dangerous as the conspiracy they were unraveling. The stakes were high, and the path before them was fraught with peril. Yet, somewhere deep within her, a voice urged her to embrace the unknown, to trust in the bond they were forging against all odds. Zareth stood in the dim light of the underground hideout, her heart racing as she replayed the transmission over and over in her mind. The words echoed ominously, Betrayal runs deep, Zareth. Trust no one. Her violet eyes darted to Kael, who was examining the holographic map of the city, his jaw clenched in thought. The gravity of their situation hung heavily between them, a mix of tension and unspoken emotions filling the air. Do you really think there's a traitor among your people? Kael broke the silence, his voice low but firm. He turned to face her, his dark hair falling across his forehead, framing a face that had become both a source of frustration and unexpected comfort for her. Zareth took a breath, trying to steady the turmoil within her. It's difficult to say. The Council has always been wary of outsiders, especially now that we're trying to forge an alliance with Earth. She glanced away, her mind racing through the implications of the betrayal. But if there is someone trying to sabotage the negotiations, it could mean disaster for both our worlds. Kael stepped closer, his presence both reassuring and electrifying. Then we have to uncover who it is, and fast. If we can expose the traitor, we might be able to salvage the peace talks. He paused, his gaze intense. And maybe save your people from a catastrophe. Zareth nodded, feeling the weight of their mission pressing down on her. We need to gather information. Find out who's been in contact with the regime and who has access to sensitive information. She met his eyes, a flicker of determination igniting between them. You're right. We can't let this go unchecked. As they began to strategize, Kael's fingers danced across the holographic display, plotting potential leads and connections. Zareth watched him, admiring his quick thinking and the passion that drove him. However, the more time they spent together, the more complicated her feelings became. She had been trained to view humans as unpredictable and dangerous, yet here she was, entrusting her heart to one of them. Let's split up, Kael suggested, breaking her reverie. I can check the rebel contacts who might have inside information about the regime's activities, while you investigate your own circle. Maybe there's someone in your ranks who has been too close to the regime. Zareth hesitated, a wave of unease washing over her. What if you're caught? If the regime finds out you're working with me? I can handle myself, he interrupted, his voice steady. I've been fighting this war for a long time, Zareth. I know how to stay one step ahead. His expression softened, and he added, besides, I'm not going to let anything happen to you. The sincerity in his words sent a shiver down her spine. All right, she acquiesced, her heart pounding. But we need to meet back here in 2 hours. If we don't, we'll assume the worst. Kael nodded, and with one last lingering look, he stepped out of the hideout, leaving Zareth alone with her thoughts. She took a moment to collect herself, pacing the small space as anxiety gnawed at her. The stakes were higher than ever, and their fragile alliance could shatter at any moment. As the 2 hours ticked by, Zareth's mind raced with potential scenarios. Each second felt like an eternity until she heard the familiar sound of footsteps echoing from the entrance. Her heart leapt, a mix of relief and apprehension flooding her senses. The door creaked open, and Kael stepped inside, his expression grim. Did you find anything? Zareth asked, her pulse quickening. Kael shook his head, frustration evident on his face. Nothing concrete. Most of the contacts I spoke to are in the dark, and those who might know something are too afraid to speak out. He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration palpable. But I did hear whispers of a clandestine meeting between some of the high-ranking officials and a mysterious figure. Someone who's been coordinating with the regime. Zareth felt a chill run down her spine. A mysterious figure? Do you know who it is? Not yet. But we need to find out, he replied, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. What about you? Did you learn anything from your people? She sighed, rubbing her temples as the memories of her conversations flooded back. I did manage to speak with one of the council members who seemed uneasy about the negotiations. He hinted at disagreements among the council regarding the alliance. She hesitated, searching for the right words. He mentioned that some believe we shouldn't trust humans at all, that we should pull back our efforts. Kael's brow furrowed. That's concerning. If there's dissent in your ranks, it could be a perfect cover for a traitor to operate unnoticed. We need to get to the bottom of this before it spirals out of control. Zareth nodded, her heart racing as they pieced together the information. We should follow the lead on that mysterious figure. If they're involved with the regime, they might have the answers we need. Then let's get moving, Kael urged, his eyes gleaming with determination. They slipped out of the hideout, navigating the shadowy alleys of the city. The streets were dimly lit, the atmosphere thick with tension and uncertainty. As they moved deeper into the urban labyrinth, Zareth could feel the undercurrent of danger lurking just beyond their sight. Suddenly, a rustling sound caught her attention, and she turned to see a group of regime soldiers rounding the corner. Her heart raced as adrenaline coursed through her veins. "We need to hide," she hissed, grabbing Kael's arm and pulling him into a narrow alcove. They pressed themselves against the cold, damp wall, holding their breath as the soldiers passed mere feet away. Zareth's heart thudded in her chest, the closeness to danger heightening her senses. She could feel Kael's body heat beside her, the tension between them electric. Once the soldiers were out of earshot, Zareth exhaled slowly, her senses still on high alert. "That was too close," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Kael smirked, the corner of his mouth lifting in a way that made her heart skip. "Just a little excitement to keep things interesting, right?" Zareth shot him a warning look, but couldn't suppress the smile that threatened to break through. "Let's just focus on the mission." They continued through the alleys, weaving between shadows and avoiding the watchful eyes of the regime. As they approached a decrepit building rumored to be the meeting place, Zareth felt a knot of anxiety settle in her stomach. What if they were walking into a trap? "Stay close," Kael murmured, his voice low and steady. "We don't know what we're walking into." Suddenly, they heard voices coming from a nearby room. Zareth and Kael exchanged a glance, both understanding the gravity of the moment. They pressed their ears against the door, straining to catch snippets of conversation. "The Veridonian diplomat is too trusting. We can't let her ruin everything," a gruff voice said, laced with contempt. "We need to act quickly. If she uncovers our plans, it will be too late," another voice replied, more measured but equally sinister. Zareth's breath hitched in her throat. They had stumbled upon something crucial. "We need to get closer," she whispered urgently. Kael nodded, his expression determined. "On three. 1, 2, 3. They pushed the door open and rushed into the room, where several high-ranking officials were gathered around a table cluttered with data pads and maps. The startled faces turned toward them, and chaos erupted. "Get them!" one of the officials shouted, reaching for a hidden weapon. Zareth and Kael sprang into action, their instincts taking over as they fought against the regime's guards. Zareth's training kicked in, and she moved with a fluid grace, her Veridonian agility allowing her to evade blows and strike back with precision. Kael fought fiercely beside her, his rebel spirit igniting as they worked in tandem. But just as they began to gain the upper hand, reinforcements arrived, pouring into the room. Zareth felt a surge of panic. They were outnumbered, and escape was becoming increasingly difficult. "Back to the exit," Kael shouted, leading the way as they fought their way through the throng of attackers. Zareth's heart raced as they darted back into the corridors, the sound of chaos echoing behind them. They dashed through the building, adrenaline propelling them forward. But as they reached the exit, they found a blockade of regime soldiers waiting for them, weapons drawn and ready to fire. "Split up," Kael yelled, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We'll meet back at the hideout." Zareth hesitated, fear gripping her heart. "What if—" "Just go," he urged, his eyes fierce. "Trust me." With a final nod, Zareth turned and sprinted down a side alley, her breath coming in sharp gasps. She could hear the sounds of the struggle behind her, the tension palpable. As she navigated the twisting streets, she felt a growing sense of urgency, knowing that their time was. Zareth stood in the dimly lit rebel hideout, the air thick with tension and anticipation. The flickering lights cast shadows on the walls, illuminating the faces of the gathered rebels, their expressions a mix of hope and fear. Kael was beside her, his presence a steady anchor amidst the chaos swirling in her mind. They had been working tirelessly to gather evidence against the regime, and now it was almost time to unveil the conspiracy that threatened both her people and his. "Are you ready for this, Zareth?" Kael's voice broke through her thoughts, laced with concern. He turned to her, his deep-set eyes searching hers for reassurance. Zareth took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her mission pressing down on her shoulders. "I want to believe this will change everything. But what if it doesn't?" She found herself questioning her own resolve, the doubts creeping in like shadows. Kael stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "We're doing this for a reason. For the people suffering under the regime. You've seen it yourself, their oppression knows no bounds. We have to expose the truth, no matter the cost." Zareth nodded, steeling herself. She had witnessed the suffering of humanity firsthand, and it fueled her determination. "You're right. We need to act swiftly. The longer we wait, the more lives are at stake." As the rebels gathered around them, Zareth felt a sense of unity forming, a bond that transcended species, forged in the fires of shared struggle. She glanced at the makeshift table where their evidence lay neatly arranged. Documents, recordings, and testimonies, all pointing to the regime's malicious intent. It was time to bring their findings to light. "Let's make sure everyone understands what's at stake," Kael said, raising his voice to address the group. "We're not just fighting for ourselves anymore. We're fighting for our future. Zareth has put herself at great risk to help us. This is our chance to turn the tide." A ripple of determination swept through the room, and Zareth felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. The rebels, once mere strangers, were now her allies, and Kael had become something much more. A partner in every sense of the word. The following day, as dawn broke over the city, Zareth and Kael stood at the forefront of the gathering crowd. People from all walks of life had come together, their faces filled with anticipation. Zareth felt the weight of their hopes resting on her shoulders. She turned to Kael, who gave her a reassuring nod, his expression one of unwavering support. "This is it," he said quietly, his breath brushing against her ear. "They need to hear the truth." As Zareth stepped up to the makeshift podium, her heart raced. She scanned the crowd, taking in the diverse faces that looked back at her. Humans, rebels, and even some curious onlookers who had come to witness the spectacle. She could feel their eagerness, their desperation for change. "People of Earth," Zareth began, her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering within her. "I stand before you not just as an ambassador of Veridonia, but as a fellow being who believes in the power of unity. Together, we can dismantle the oppressive regime that seeks to control us all." A cheer erupted from the crowd, filling her with renewed courage. She steadied herself, recalling the evidence they had gathered. "Today, we unveil the truth behind the regime's malicious plans. Plans that endanger not just Veridonians but every human who dares to dream of freedom." As she launched into the details of the conspiracy, Zareth could see the crowd hanging on to her every word. She detailed the regime's treachery, their intentions to strike a catastrophic blow to both their worlds, and the dark betrayal lurking within her own ranks. But just as she reached the climax of her speech, a figure emerged from the throng. A man cloaked in shadows, his face obscured. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice booming over the crowd. "You don't know what you're doing, Zareth." Zareth's heart sank as she recognized the voice. It was Alaris, a trusted advisor from her own delegation, someone she had considered an ally. Her blood ran cold as he stepped forward, his eyes narrowed with betrayal. "You think you can expose the regime without consequences?" he sneered, his tone dripping with contempt. "You're a fool to trust these rebels. They'll only use you to further their own agenda." The crowd murmured in confusion, and Zareth felt the tension crackle in the air. She glanced at Kael, who looked equally stunned. "What are you doing, Alaris?" she demanded, her voice rising above the crowd's whispers. "You were supposed to be on our side." Alaris laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that cut through her heart. "On your side? You've betrayed your own people for a mere human. You think they'll welcome you after this? They'll turn on you the moment they realize your weakness." Kael stepped forward, his expression fierce. Zareth's strength lies in her willingness to fight for what's right. It's you who have betrayed your own principles. His voice rang out, rallying the crowd behind them. But Alaris wasn't finished. You think you've uncovered the truth? You don't know the half of it. If you go through with this, I will expose your secrets, Zareth. The council will never forgive you for aligning with these rebels. Zareth's breath caught in her throat. The stakes had just escalated beyond what she had anticipated. She felt the weight of Alaris's threat pressing down on her, but she couldn't show weakness. Not now, not in front of these people who had put their faith in her. You think your threats scare me? Zareth replied, her voice firm. The truth is stronger than your lies. I will not back down. The crowd erupted in a chorus of support, rallying behind her. But Zareth felt the ground beneath her shake with uncertainty. Could she reveal everything she had kept hidden? Or would it jeopardize not just her mission, but her very existence in this world? Alaris smirked, sensing her hesitation. Then prepare for the consequences, Zareth. You won't be able to hide from the truth forever. The tension in the air was palpable, and Zareth felt a chill run down her spine. Time slowed as she searched for the right words, her mind racing. She had to act, to regain control of the situation before it spiraled out of her grasp. But the moment hung heavy, a fragile balance teetering on the edge of chaos. Zareth's heart raced as she realized that she was standing at a crossroads, not only for herself but for both her worlds. The weight of her choices loomed large, and she could feel the eyes of the crowd upon her, waiting for her next move. The tension in the air was palpable as Zareth stood frozen, her mind racing with the implications of the traitor's words. Just as she opened her mouth to respond, a massive explosion erupted in the distance, shaking the ground beneath her feet. The sound was deafening, followed by the chaos of people screaming and scattering in every direction. The crowd, once united in anticipation of a pivotal moment, was now a mass of panic and confusion. Zareth! Kael's voice cut through the din, urgent and commanding. He grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the podium, his grip firm yet reassuring. We need to get out of here. They maneuvered through the chaos, Zareth's heart pounding. She could hardly process what had just happened, her thoughts swirling in a tempest of fear and betrayal. The regime had anticipated this moment, recognizing the threat Zareth posed not only to their plans but also to the fragile power dynamics between their worlds. They were not just trying to silence her. They were trying to eradicate any hope for peace. Over here, Kael shouted, leading Zareth toward a side exit that had been hidden from the main gathering. The air smelled of smoke and burnt debris as they dashed away from the chaos, the sounds of destruction echoing behind them. Once outside, they stumbled into an alley, the sounds of the explosion muffled but still present. Zareth leaned against the cold, damp wall, trying to catch her breath. What just happened? She gasped, her voice strained. Was that your people? No, Kael replied sharply, his eyes narrowed with determination. That came from the regime. They're trying to kill you. And me. We need to move before they figure out where we are. Zareth felt a wave of panic wash over her. She had come to Earth with the hope of forging an alliance, and now she was being hunted. But why would my people do this? They were supposed to support me. Kael met her gaze, his expression a mix of frustration and concern. You said yourself that some of your people don't trust me, or anyone from Earth for that matter. If they think you've gone too far, they wouldn't dare. Zareth interrupted, her voice rising with indignation. I am a diplomat. I was sent here to negotiate peace. Peace, Kael scoffed, shaking his head. Peace means nothing to those who value power over lives. You need to face the truth, Zareth. Your loyalty to your planet could cost us everything. The weight of his words hung heavily in the air. Zareth felt a knot form in her stomach. She had devoted her life to her people, yet they had just turned against her. She was caught between her duty and her growing feelings for Kael, which complicated everything. As much as she wanted to deny it, the truth was becoming painfully clear. Then what do I do? She whispered, her voice trembling. I can't go back. I'll be killed. Kael stepped closer, his expression softening. We fight back. We expose the truth. If we can unite the rebels and the loyal Veridonians, we can turn this around. Zareth nodded, determination igniting within her. You're right, but we need a plan. I can't just walk into the Veridonian camp and expect them to listen to me after what's just happened. Let's find a safe place to regroup, Kael suggested. We need to gather information and find out what's really going on. If we can prove that the regime is behind this, we can rally the people against them. As they moved deeper into the alleyways, Zareth felt a sense of urgency. The world around them was falling apart, but she had a purpose now. The thought of returning to Veridonia empty-handed, or worse, as a traitor, was unbearable. She would not let her people down, nor would she abandon Kael. They finally reached a small, abandoned building that was hidden from sight. Inside, the air was stale, and debris littered the floor. Kael quickly scanned the area, ensuring it was safe before they settled in. Let's gather our thoughts, he said, his voice steady. What do we know? Zareth took a deep breath, her mind racing. I received a transmission warning me of a betrayal, but I didn't think it would come to this. There must be a faction within my people that feels threatened by my alliance with you. They see it as a weakness, and they fear what it represents. Kael nodded, his brow furrowing in thought. And they're willing to kill to maintain their control. But we can expose them. If we find evidence of their plans, we can turn the people against them. Zareth's heart raced as an idea took shape in her mind. What if I reveal my true identity? If I show them that I'm the heir to the Veridonian throne, they might be forced to listen. I can use my position to unite both sides against the regime. Kael's eyes widened in surprise. You're a princess? I was hidden away for my own protection, Zareth explained, her voice steadying. But now it's time to reveal who I am. I can't let fear dictate my actions any longer. This is bigger than just me. It's about our worlds. A fire ignited in Kael's eyes as he grasped her hands tightly. If we do this, there's no turning back. You'll be putting everything on the line. Zareth's heart raced at the thought, but she felt a surge of determination. I know, but I believe in what we're fighting for. I believe in us. With their plan set, they began gathering information and reaching out to their respective allies. Zareth used her diplomatic connections to contact loyalists in Veridonia, while Kael rallied the rebels. Their bond grew stronger with each passing moment, their shared purpose uniting them in ways they had never imagined. As they prepared for the confrontation ahead, Zareth's resolve solidified. She would face her people, reveal her identity, and fight for a future where both humans and Veridonians could coexist. With Kael by her side, she felt a sense of hope she hadn't experienced before. The time for action was near, and as Zareth looked into Kael's eyes, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Their love, once forbidden, was now a powerful force that could change the fate of both their worlds. With their hearts intertwined, they set out to reshape history, ready to confront the darkness that loomed over them.